Did you know that before there was a CIA, there was an OSS? Okay. And no, I'm not talking about that Swedish death metal band. I'm talking about America's first official shadow army. The Office of Strategic Services was established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in May of 1942, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Prior to the OSS, spy stuff was handled by the military, but FDR believed that a civilian spy agency would be better at operating behind enemy lines. He wanted someone with experience leading people in hostile environments. So he turned to none other than Wild Bill Donovan. Now, if you don't know about Wild Bill Donovan, let me catch you up. He'd been a Treasury agent in the early 1900s, then became one of the founders of the FBI before going off the rails. During the First World War, he led a team of scouts behind enemy lines. But after being reprimanded for going rogue and disobeying orders, he spent the next 20 years building up his own private intelligence apparatus, which he used to help out the federal government whenever they asked. Donovan's spy network also had connections to organized crime, which was very useful when he was sent to Nazi Germany in the late 30s to rescue 2 kidnapped American journalists. That mission was a success, but Donovan's methods were deemed too aggressive, and he was forced to resign from the agency he helped found. When FDR created the OSS, he gave Donovan carte blanche to do whatever it took to gather intel and conduct covert ops behind enemy lines. As director of the OSS, Donovan recruited around 13,000 operatives, most of whom were civilians. They were trained in things like explosives, demolition, infiltration, and evasion, weapons and tactics, cryptography, and how to blend into other cultures. If they got captured, they were instructed to resist interrogation for as long as possible, and if that failed, they were told to use the escape kit hidden in the heel of their shoes. This included things like a saw, a compass, some morphine, a makeshift weapon, and a roll of fuse. The OSS had 4 main sections, each focused on a different region of the world. They were responsible for all sorts of missions in theaters of war, from training resistance fighters to gathering intel to full-on sabotage. In Nazi Germany, OSS agents were involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler. In Italy, they aided the country's resistance movement. In France, they dropped agents into Nazi-occupied territory to gather intel or blow up bridges and factories. And in China, they worked alongside the nationalist Chinese army against the Japanese. In Britain, the OSS had its own section called the Special Operations Executive. It was created in June of 1942 after France fell to the Nazis, fearing that Britain could be invaded next. They needed a way to fight back against the Germans without risking British soldiers. So, SOE agents conducted sabotage missions in Nazi Germany, working from within to weaken the German war machine. There were 3 main ways that OSS and SOE agents operated in Nazi Germany. The first was through local sympathizers who hated the Nazis. These people were often members of the German resistance, and they assisted Allied spies by giving them food, shelter, and intel. Second, there were sleeper agents, people who were placed in Germany by the OSS prior to the invasion. Most of these agents went into hiding after the German takeover, waiting for the order to begin their mission. The third method was the most dangerous. Agents would parachute or otherwise sneak into Germany and carry out sabotage, assassination, or reconnaissance missions. One of the most famous OSS operations in Nazi Germany was called the Hotel Sledge. In March of 1945, a group of OSS operatives infiltrated the Hotel Sledge in Berchtesgaden. It was here that Hitler's personal secretary, Otto Gunsch, lived along with several other high-ranking Nazi officials. On April 29th, as Allied troops closed in on the hotel, OSS agents planted bombs in the basement and blew up the entire building. While this didn't kill any major Nazi figures, it did eliminate many of Hitler's top staff. Another OSS operation in Nazi Germany was called Operation Bag of Bolts. This was a plan to assassinate Adolf Hitler. It was devised in August of 1944 and involved dropping a team of commandos into his vacation home in Berchtesgaden. There was just one problem. The OSS wasn't the only organization with this idea. British intelligence had already tried to kill Hitler twice with 2 separate attempts at Operation Foxley. Both attempts failed because of bad weather, but that didn't stop the OSS from trying. Their version of the mission was called Operation Zeus. It involved dropping 13 commandos into Berchtesgaden and sneaking into Hitler's home through a ventilation shaft. They would then plant a bomb and blow up the building. However, this operation was canceled after it was discovered that Hitler was never at his vacation home. He retreated to an underground bunker in Berlin instead. So Operation Zeus never happened. Perhaps the most ambitious OSS operation in Nazi Germany was called Operation Sunrise. This was a plan to end the war quickly by convincing German leaders to surrender to the United States rather than the Soviet Union. OSS agents met with German officials in Switzerland and eventually convinced them to agree to a ceasefire. On May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered to the Allies, ending World War II in Europe. Some historians argue that Operation Sunrise played a major role in bringing the war to a quick and peaceful conclusion. The OSS did a lot of good during World War II, but it wasn't always pretty. At the end of the day, they were a covert organization operating behind enemy lines. Things were bound to get messy. One of the most controversial OSS operations took place in Manila in February of 1945. U.S. forces had taken control of the city. Thousands of Japanese troops were still hiding in the sewers. The OSS came up with a plan to flush them out by dropping leaflets from planes that were piloted by members of the Filipino Air Force. The leaflets were designed to look like propaganda, but they actually contained messages for the Japanese soldiers telling them where to find food and water. This led over 100 Japanese soldiers to leave the sewers and surrender to the OSS. However, the operation also resulted in the deaths of hundreds of Filipino civilians who were caught in the crossfire. Another controversial OSS operation took place in Rangoon, Burma, in March of 1945. The OSS had a unit called the Black Cats, which specialized in conducting psychological warfare. In Rangoon, the Black Cats distributed leaflets and posters urging the Japanese to surrender. But they also used loudspeakers to broadcast surrender messages directly into Japanese-controlled areas. One day, a group of Japanese soldiers opened fire on a crowd of unarmed civilians. The Black Cats responded by broadcasting a message over the loudspeaker, telling the soldiers that they were surrounded and that their best chance of survival was to lay down their weapons and surrender. The soldiers agreed and laid down their arms, but the OSS then opened fire on them, killing or capturing every single one of them. This event was later cited as an example of the brutality of the OSS. So what made the OSS so dangerous? Well, it was a combination of factors. First, they were a new organization with untested methods. No one was sure how well OSS tactics would work in real-world situations. Second, they were a civilian organization operating outside of the law. OSS agents were not bound by the same rules and regulations as military personnel. This allowed them to be more flexible and innovative in their approach to covert operations. But it also meant that they were less accountable for their actions. Third, they were operating in an environment where anything goes. When you're in enemy territory, the rules are very different. OSS agents were often forced to make tough decisions with little to no oversight. This led to a number of controversial incidents, but it also allowed the OSS to be more effective than traditional military organizations. The OSS was disbanded in 1945, but its legacy lived on in the CIA. Today, the CIA is one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. It's responsible for gathering intel and conducting covert operations all over the globe. While the CIA is more secretive than ever before, we can be sure that they wouldn't be where they are today without the OSS. If you want to learn more about the OSS, I highly recommend checking out a book called The Secret War by author Lisa Olmec. It's a great read and really gives you insight into what these people did. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.